Hey everybody, I felt like making a ranking video. Ranking videos are quite a popular game on YouTube, so I thought I will contribute. And I chose a ranking of the British band Yes, because Yes has been more or less part of my musical life for the last 35 or more years. Um, in good days and in bad days. So I thought this will be a good band to rank. But actually, I've already done it 2 days ago, and while I was editing the video, I realized that it's almost 2 hours long, and that's just a length that would be torturous for everyone. So I basically took it and threw it into the virtual dustbin and thought I start again, but this time let's keep it quick and let's get through all the 21 albums that I have put together and listened to again and compared and thought about in the last 2 weeks, probably. The rules are simple: only studio albums, no live albums, no compilations, and Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe counts as a Yes album. Like it or not, that's my choice. I certainly didn't do this to trash the music of Yes in any way. Usually, my critique happens by silence, by not talking about something, particularly when it's about music. I don't like trashing music. But in this case, it's not entirely possible because once you start ranking things, you need to explain a little bit and then you automatically become a bit critical. So we will see. This is obviously all very subjective, and even for me, this is rather a fluid process. So even while I was looking at and listening to all this music again and again, I kind of re-evaluated my own ranking. Now I'm doing this in English, and besides the fact that this is a good exercise for me, I think my German-speaking visitors of my channel are probably not that interested in Yes. So, of those people that come across my channel and might find it in any way interesting, those will probably be the English-speaking one, I guess. What else? Well, the results, by the way, are not too original. Do not expect a too shocking order of things, but maybe in some parts this might actually surprise you. However, let's not waste any more time and let's start. 21 albums. Number 21, my least favorite Yes album is, well, unsurprisingly, Open Your Eyes. Now, I'm not too crazy about the sound of this album. It's rather this sort of a modern compressed wall of sound, and I don't find it particularly pleasant. What comes to mind is that, well, Alan White is very boring on this album, which is kind of unnecessary, I think. At this point, he was in the band for far over 20 years, and he could have said, hey, I'm Alan White, give me something better to drum. But he obviously didn't do that, and it kind of sounds all the time like he's phoning it in, so to speak. Now, not everything is bad about this record, so it starts with a track called New State of Mind, which is a rather sort of a hard rock type of pop song. It actually sounds like Trevor Rabin is still in the band, which at this point he's not. Probably one of the highlights of the record is the title track Open Your Eyes, by the way, with Steve Porcaro on the keyboards, although he didn't know that at the time when he recorded his track that he's playing on a Yes song. Open Your Eyes has this great vocal duet or battle between John Anderson and Chris Squire. That's actually sort of the more positive aspect of the song, but then again the refrain is so corny, which for me is always the weakness of the later Yes stuff, these kind of corny cheeseball refrains, choruses in the songs. Yeah, there is the track called Universal Garden, which is a kind of okay pop track with some intriguing moments. There's a track called Love Shine, which is basically horrid and probably one of the worst songs ever recorded by Yes. And a bit of a highlight is a track called Man in the Moon, sung entirely by Chris Squire. And this is a pretty cool song once you ignore the rather lackluster lyrics. So that's kind of all I can say about this album. So it's not the kind of record I would return to often, but the song "Open Your Eyes" probably can kind of grow on you, I guess. Number 20, 1994's "Talk," the last album with Trevor Rabin, as far as I remember. Now, it starts with the calling, which is a typical Trevor Rabin schlock, but a kind of cool Alan White drumming. There's a track, the second track is "I'm Waiting," which is really horribly corny. I mean, this is another example of this super cheeseball pop song. "Real Love" is actually kind of good song. This is probably one of the few tracks here that kind of get my attention. Although the whole song is kind of based on a guitar gimmick, so to speak. Walls is really a bad song, I think. This is kind of the worst song on the album. Interestingly, co-written between Trevor Rabin and Roger Hodgson from Supertramp. But still, you know. By the way, Trevor Rabin tried to hire or to cast Roger Hodgson as the next singer of Yes. Few years prior to that, when John Anderson kind of left the band to make the ABWH project. And, well, thankfully Roger Hodgson declined, because I think this would not have been a good idea. "Where Will You Be?" The second last track is actually a pretty intriguing track. Kind of nice patterns in the background. It's intriguing. Well, and then the album ends with this 15-minute long suite called "Endless Dream," which is written by Trevor Rabin and John Anderson. And the better part of the whole album. I read John Anderson once saying that it's as good as "Awaken" and "Close to the Edge." Holy shit. No, it's not as good as that. But around 7 minutes, 20 seconds, there's suddenly this dark dystopian part, almost like dark ambient. This is pretty cool. So there's a very intense atmosphere. On the other hand, there are melodies and really corny chorus parts in this song that actually kind of remind me of Modern Talking. And that's not a compliment. So I certainly wanted to like talk a little more, but I just could not. Number 19, "Heaven and Earth." So John Davison, this last singer of Yes, has this unbelievably ungrateful job of replacing John Anderson, which you kind of can't do. So actually, you need quite a strong back to just do something like that. The whole album kind of sounds like, I don't know, Todd Rundgren joining Supertramp or something in that direction. As shown in the first two tracks, "Believe Again" and "The Game," which are kind of... Yeah, the whole album kind of lacks energy, and also it lacks frequency. Something about it is so very numb and dull. It's kind of difficult to explain. The third track is called "Step Beyond," which I believe the theme, the opening theme of the track is kind of stolen from ABBA. If you check out ABBA's song "Name of the Game," there is this bridge after the refrain. It kind of sounds like this, so kind of similar sort of whimsical part. However, "In a World of Our Own" is a kind of interesting track, probably the first one that managed to kind of grab my attention. Although, like on the rest of the album, Jeffrey Downs is a little bit underwhelming. I mean, the songs are not entirely bad, but just the problem with this album is that it completely lacks any kind of identity or any kind of personality. Now, it's not all lost and bad. There is a track, the sixth track, called "Light of the Ages," entirely written by Davison. So it's quite a good track with with a known identity and with a kind of a prog rock aesthetic and sort of a hypnotic style. So I like that one. And the last one is called Subway Walls, which is rather intriguing. So here finally Jeffrey Downes got something to do, and yeah, particularly the last 5 minutes really turned out to be very cool. But then, I mean, the entire album sounds like something made by a sort of a, Christian soft rock band or something like that. So if there wasn't Light of the Ages and Subway Walls, this would probably easily be my least favorite album by Yes. But these two songs kind of saved the day for this album. So number 18, The Ladder from 1999. Now this is the one album they made with Bruce Fairbairn, who was the producer of Kiss and Van Halen and Scorpions. And I don't know if this was such a good idea, but they probably needed just someone who knew how to produce an album. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a sad story because Bruce Fairbairn, he died during the production of this album. He was actually found by John Anderson. There's an intriguing opening with the track called Homeworld. Followed by It Will Be a Good Day, The River, which is again one of those super corny tracks. Very well executed by, hey, what a cheese ball. Lightning Strikes is basically a goofy song. Can I is this kind of a short reference to We Have Heaven from the Fragile album. Alright. There is a track called Face to Face, which is a rather decent song with an impressive bass playing. The really good stuff is actually more towards the end of the album. The Messenger. The Messenger is a pretty decent pop number. And New Language is probably the highlight here. It's a song 9 minutes long and actually quite good. But it's probably really the pinnacle of the record. And the final track, Nine Voices, is not bad at all. Particularly because of Randy Ray and Royce, who they hired to play all these Middle Eastern instruments on the record. But the problem is this all comes to fruition like in the last 2 minutes of the record. So at that moment when I really started to like it, the CD was over. So two things come to mind when I see that. First of all, I think Yes have always been a bit of a victim of that change of the album format from LP, from vinyl LP to CD, because suddenly all these albums had to be like 60-70 minutes long. So basically every album had to be a double album, and I think this always a bit hurt the result, because I think for a band like Yes, 35 to 40 minutes, it's really nice, snappy time where you just pick your best moments and create an album. And there's a lot of filler stuff on albums like that. The other thing that comes to mind is that all the later years Yes albums kind of have the best tracks in the back, and I can really imagine how they've been sitting around the table and thinking, this complicated songs, let's put them in the back because people don't want to hear that. But this could be hit material, put it in front, which is complete nonsense, of course, because people are still angry about those short songs at the beginning. So I think you will oftentimes find with these later year albums that kind of the few jams that are there can always be found at the back of the record. So number 17, Big Generator. This was 1987. Yeah, it's a well-known fact that making this album took forever. Trevor Horn was attached to this project and kind of ran away halfway through. So Trevor Rabin took over. I've always disliked Big Generator for many, many years because basically after 90125 it was such a huge disappointment. And but over the years I've mellowed out a little bit and started to appreciate it a little more. Maybe particularly because some of the later albums were so much worse. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. But the sound is quite great here. This is a beautifully produced and beautifully mixed album. And the first three songs, Rhythm of Love, Big Generator, and Shoot High, Aim Low, are obviously pretty impressive pop songs. Obviously directed at the sort of a top 10 hit market, and some of it I think scored pretty good. I think this was a rather successful album. This was just not very successful in my universe, but I can imagine somewhere else in a different realm this has been a hit record. The song Big Generator oftentimes gets a lot of hate because it's a bit of a silly lyrics, but as a song I kind of learned to like it a little more. I think Shoot High, Aim Low is also a very, very well crafted pop song. Beautiful vocals, Love Will Find a Way, it's an excellent pop schlock, why not? Well, for me, the actual highlight of this album comes very late in the game. The second last song, I'm Running, is for me the best song on this album. And yeah, I don't have that much more to say about it. I mean, it's a overall very tasteful pop record. That's just not my personal taste that much. Number 16, Fly From Here, with or without the return trip. So yeah, let's move the elephant in the room out of the way first. This is the one album that they kind of recorded twice. So in 2011, after John Anderson's health problems, they just decided to hire another singer, which was this Canadian guy Benoit David, or David. And I guess the first project that was scheduled was Fly From Here, which was kind of the return of Trevor Horn and Jeffrey Downes, and working over some old shelved material from the drama days. I can imagine even back in the day when this was planned, the idea that Trevor Horn should be singing this was already on the table, because it made kind of sense, because it's kind of like Drama Part 2, and this was the original lineup of Drama, etc., etc. You know the story. But I guess Chris Squire, who was always a bit of a kingmaker in Yes, probably stomped down his big foot and said, no, we have now here Benoit, and Benoit is gonna sing it. So they recorded it, the whole album, with Benoit David, and one would have thought, yeah, that's it. But for reasons that are kind of difficult to understand, 2018, they did it basically all over again, with this time with Trevor Horn on the vocals. Actually, I think they don't even re-recorded it. What they just did is just taking the project, open it in Pro Tools, and just muted Benoit's voice and started to record Trevor Horn. So it's always puzzled me as a slightly weird action. I mean, is it just a money grab or what? Why? It makes no sense, particularly because one could always make the argument that Benoit David was an imperfect replacement for John Anderson. Not his fault. Basically, everybody is an imperfect replacement for John Anderson, as much as Trevor Horn in 1980 was an imperfect replacement for John Anderson. But Benoit David and Trevor Horn, they sound basically the same. I cannot distinguish their voices. I really can't. So regardless if you have this CD as or album as the original one from 2011 or the kind of remake with Trevor Horn, it really makes not much difference, honestly, because it sounds kind of the same for me. So it feels like they're trying to retcon this Benoit guy out of Yes's history. So it's weird, and it doesn't feel very tasteful, this whole operation, but this is actually something you get used with Yes over the years, that there's always some kind of a weird shit show behind the curtains, which is something you expect from rock and roll. It feels a bit different with this band, particularly maybe because Yes have always been this kind of a band always singing about love and how we all respect and love each other, etc., etc. So there's a lot of do as we sing and not as we do in the background here. However, is it a good album? Is it a bad album? That's the question here. it's in parts not bad. I mean, it sounds really good, and it starts with this whole 22-minute long "We Can Fly" composition. So this is one of the return to the larger format. It has a strange, depressing layer to the whole thing, which is kind of interesting and a bit unusual with Yes. So why not? Kind of an overall mysterious vibe. My personal highlight is a segment here called "Sad Night at the Airfield." I think this is quite a good track. There's another song that is sang entirely by Chris Squire called "The Man You Always Wanted Me to Be." And the album ends with a track called "Into the Storm," which is quite a song kept in this atmosphere and style of the drama album. So it's not a terrible album. I would certainly give it a listen from time to time. And it really doesn't matter which version of the album you have in terms of the way it sounds. So, number 15. Drama from 1980. We have been just talking about it. So, some people will probably get upset that it doesn't rank higher than this. But on the other hand, everything that comes from now is regarded as pretty good by me. So it's not meant as any kind of critique of this album. This album didn't get much love in the 80s, by the way. I remember that quite well. This was very much dismissed by everybody, and it's interesting how this record managed to grow on people over the decades, and today it's highly respected, and you will find some people that certainly rank it amongst their 3 favorite Yes albums. So this album gets appreciated again, and rightly so. It's very unique in style, and certainly stands a bit apart from the other Yes albums. Obviously, this is the one with Trevor Horn and Jeffrey Downs joining the band. It starts with Machine Messiah, which is a pretty cool track. It kind of contains the little bit of the aggression of the Gates of Delirium, and Jeffrey Downs is pretty good here. A very memorable portamento effect in this song, and those were the days. Those were the days when you could impress people with that. Great bass playing on a track called "Does It Really Happen?" Certainly one of my favorite tracks here. "Into the Lens" is probably one of the most known pieces from this record. "Run Through the Light" is what the hell is that song about? Probably just a reminder that the two new guys are from the Buggles. And "Tempus Fugit" is obviously this legendary great track closing the album. Amazing bass playing by Chris Squire, and quite impressive that he was sort of playing these fast lines and at the same time singing the second voice of this track the entire time. So that's quite impressive. It's an edgy song. So yeah, that's Drama. So number 14, Union. Yeah, I've always liked Union much better than other people do. That's a fact. I've also read the leaked interviews with Jonathan Elias and Jimmy Hahn, which kind of put things into perspective why the album turned out as it did. Obviously, this was the story when there was a new Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman and Howe record in making, and suddenly there was this executive producer's idea to merge the Yes West Camp's new music with this material to kind of create the illusion of a huge union of all these little adversarial camps, and creating this large, fascinating 8-piece Yes band, which of course never happened in studio because this was all kind of homunculus, Frankenstein's monster. Of the fact is that the members of the band, some of them were just a little too stoned to record most of the time, or just too much complaining about everybody else in the room. So it makes sense that Elias and Horn just kind of took over and tried to salvage this dumpster fire. And yeah, you may like what you hear or you may dislike it. Rick Wakeman said that he threw the mixtape, the first mix down that he received out of the limousine after hearing it only once. Bill Bruford went on record to say that this is the worst album he was ever on. Whose fault is it when such seasoned, experienced musicians kind of lose control over a production like that? So yeah, so I think there's probably a lot of blame to shift around. But that being said, I still find there are some really amazing songs on this album. There are a lot of tracks that quite annoy me, but it's just this rich reservoir of interesting music, I would say. So it starts with I Would Have Waited Forever, which is an okay song, I guess, but just right the next one, A Shock to the System, is a pretty good song. It kind of grows on you, has a good refrain. Great stuff played by Bill Bruford and Tony Levin. And also Steve Howe. Lift Me Up is a Trevor Rabin track that has a typically horrible cheeseball chorus. Despite the single components of the song being actually great, but in the end it's kind of all heading to this towards this refrain that is always a bit too on the cheesy side. Without Hope You Cannot Start the Day, written by John Anderson and Jonathan Elias. This is definitely a highlight of the album, I would say. Saving My Heart, corny as hell. This is a bridge too far. I really cannot digest this kind of music. That's kind of Trevor Rabin solo album stuff. Yeah, Miracle of Life, another Rabin song, is a little better, but this kind of concludes the Trevor Rabin contributions to this record. Now, The More We Live, Let Go by Chris Squire is quite enormous. This is actually engineered by Eddie Offord. And I love this track. This is a very different mood. It's more of a direction of a sort of a glam hard rock song, but it's very cool. It's very cool. Silent Talking is actually rather brilliant. It's another highlight here. And then you have Angkor Wat. Now, everybody is kind of shitting over this song in their reviews. I noticed that, by the way. I do look and listen to this. Now, I think this is an amazing track, completely underrated and probably overly criticized by people that lack any kind of fantasy or any kind of ability to perceive music on a broader scale, because obviously this is a song by Wakeman and Anderson that is entirely in the realm of ambient music and fourth world music, with this kind of fascinating girl's voice in the Khmer language. So this is about Angkor Wat, about Cambodia, and it's a beautiful track. I mean, this is one of my favorite Yes tracks. Actually, I would put it on a kind of a mixtape of Yes's music anytime. Do you remember mixtapes? I wonder if you remember mixtapes. So it's followed by a track called Dangerous. Another heavyweight track by Anderson and Elias. And yeah, it's a kind of a rock schlock, but I kind of like it. It's pretty cool. Holding On is a totally overlooked song by Yes that is quite wonderful, actually. And then you have this little meditation called Evensong, which is just... well, it's just Tony Levin and Bill Bruford. Wonderful little tiny gem. It's really beautiful. And it's so cool that you have Tony Levin playing on a Yes album, almost unnoticed, playing his Chapman stick. And then Take the Water to the Mountain closes the album. Quite a good track, I think. And the CD has one track more, which is called Give and Take, and which is a pretty okay track. Ultimate Classic Rock has ranked this album as Yes's worst album. I say utter drivel. This is actually not a bad record. There's a lot of stuff that I usually dismiss and skip because it's just not in my vein. but there are some pretty good tracks here. And that's why it ranks rather high on my list. And this leads us to the number 13, which is the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman and Howe album from 1989, as far as I remember. This was a surprising album, mostly for us Yes fans that were so disappointed by Big Generator. This gave us a little breather because in many sense this was return to some more progressive and exploratory ideas. Now it's far from being a perfect album. But at least even the corny tracks here kind of try to push the envelope and try to do something new. There's a certain innovation. So this is basically the 1972 lineup without Chris Squire, who here was replaced by the magnificent Tony Levin. So that's not the worst replacement. And the album starts with... just open the gatefold once just to have a look at it. It's, by the way, a very good pressing. It sounds really good. This was very surprising to me when I bought this in 1989. This had an immaculate sound. It starts with the themes, which has a lot of sort of Bill Bruford digital drumming on it. Right away followed by Fist of Fire, which is certainly a highlight on this album. I really like that song. Very amazing stuff played by Wakeman and very commanding vocals by John Anderson. Brother of Mine, yeah, it's another good song, more lighthearted. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Eric Serra and his soundtracks he did for sort of the 80s Luc Besson movies. Then the next track is Birthright, and that's probably my favorite song here on this record. It's quite amazing. Great drumming by Bill Bruford, and like around 3 minutes 50. Check out this hilarious keyboard solo by Rick Wakeman. It's basically just high-speed noodling, but no one gets away better with high-speed noodling than Rick Wakeman, of course. It's not like I like every track on this record. I mean, the B-side is a bit checkered for me. I mean, I could do without a track like Teague Boys or Teague Bois. I don't know how to pronounce that. The Great Sleeve Design by Roger Dean, of course. So this is more or less a pretty good album and certainly some interesting stuff to discover if you don't know it already. And let's move to the next one. The next one, number 12, is Magnification from the year 2001. Now, this album kind of came about after this famous Igor Koroshev incident, and suddenly the band had fired their keyboarder and were basically a four-piece, and the solution was to go to California and to hire an orchestra and record an album with an orchestra, which is not always a good idea in my opinion, and I have a whole bunch of records that certainly don't benefit from the presence of an orchestra. But however, in this case, great. This is really a good album and I really like it from beginning to the end. It opens with this title track, Magnification, which very neat violins, very functional. It's a kind of a beautiful, uplifting vibe to it, kind of reminiscent of sort of a Henry Mancini soundtracks or something like that. So slightly sort of a romantic, exotic touch to it, sort of like exotica music of the 50s. So it's very likable. Next track, Spirit of Survival, is a very good track with nasty bass playing. Another great composition is Give Love Each Day, and so on and so on. It goes on without ever presenting any kind of a stinker or filler. I really like the entire album, and that's the reason why it ranks so high here in my list compared with others. So quite outstanding production. Now at this point they have not given up on the sort of large canvas compositions. So you have one here too, it's called In the Presence Of. It's a very, very tasteful, large track. It's kind of fun to listen to. It's probably the closest you get here to the sound of the Yes of the 70s. By the way, with the neat piano playing by Alan White. Not many know that he's a pretty accomplished pianist. There is also a track called Dreamtime, which for me is the highlight of this record. And this is really a top tier composition and great song. So overall, this album sounds great. I really like it. And it's probably from the later years the only album that I wouldn't mind having on vinyl. Not only because it's a good album, but because the cover looks kind of good. So that's Magnification. Let's get to number 11. And this would be Yes by Yes from 1969. Their first album, their debut album. Now this is really a nice, sweet debut. And even though it was not successful, but I think people came to appreciate it much more over the years. Now I don't have the album the way it was released, but what I got here is this quite weird 1973 publication, which is basically a double album putting together their first and their second album in a gatefold sleeve. So if you open the gatefold sleeve, you actually get the original design of the record, how it was when it came out in 1968. And yeah, I mean, there's a great opening here with Beyond and Before, written by Chris Squire and Clive Bailey. So they were together in the Mabel Greer's Toy Shop. This was the band, basically Yes, before it was called Yes. And there is Yesterday and Today by John Anderson, which is really the sweetest ballad and love song I've ever heard. Quite wonderful. Looking Around, great psychedelic rock written by Anderson and Squire. It's very edgy, very 60s. On the B-side you have a track called Sweetness, which is actually, I'm not sure, but I think this Sweetness is like the first song Squire and Anderson ever wrote together. So basically after the historical encounter in Jack Barry's La Chaise Club in 100 Wardour Street, where basically the kernel of Yes was created. And I think Sweetness was one of the tracks that kind of came out of this. And finally you have Survival, the last track on this album, which is pretty good. This is a highlight of the record, and interestingly it's like a glimpse into the future, because of all the tracks on this album it gives you mostly the impression what the band is going to sound like in the future. Yeah, so this was the debut album. Now my number 10 is Tormato from 1978. Again, another album that I certainly like better than most of the people that talk about it on YouTube. But yeah, this album doesn't get much love, which is a shame, because I think some of the best Yes songs are actually here. It's a bit of a flawed gem, of course, but I think it deserves a little more respect and appreciation. So it starts with this Future Time / Rejoice, which has this kind of a marching drum rhythm played by Alan White. And it's a very intriguing song, very glorious somehow. And John Anderson is vocally really on top of his game here. It's followed by Don't Kill the Whale, which in my opinion is just one of the best songs he has ever recorded. The idea that people usually, when they review this album, they kind of brush over it like it's not that important. This kind of drives me a bit crazy, and it's a mistake. And by the way, Yes, we're actually probably one of the very first bands that picked up this topic and sang about whaling and the atrocities of whaling. Prior to them, I think only Crosby and Nash with their song To the Last Whale from their 1975 album Wind on the Water, were the only musicians before Yes that probably dealt with the topic of whaling. And back in the day, whaling was really this horrendous giant industry where countries like Russia, Norway, Japan and Canada participated, and quite awful. I mean, it's still disgusting that even to this day there's a Japanese whaling fleet, roaming the Antarctic waters, just killing animals that in parts appear to be more intelligent than a whole bunch of people that I've met in my lifetime. And that tells you a lot. So give more love to Don't Kill the Whale, please. It's followed by Madrigal, which is another track that people dismiss a lot, unfairly I think. That's Rick Wakeman playing on the original Thomas Goff harpsichord, and it's a sweet little song, only 2 minutes 30 long, so no harm done. And then the A-side ends with Release Release, which is another highlight here, a damn good energetic track. Yeah, the B-side is a bit checkered, I know that. A lot has been said about it, and I don't need to repeat it all. But you have a track like Onward, which is this sweet Chris Squire composition, very calm and structurally rather simple and quite beautiful in itself. Yeah, and the album ends with a very overlooked and underrated track called On the Silent Wings of Freedom, which is damn good. So, yeah, I mean, it was a very dysfunctional band at this point and probably unmanageable, but I think it's still quite a fascinating album worth exploring, at least for me. And that leads us to what's the next on my list? Time and the Word from 1970. I've always liked this album. There's something very intriguing and fascinating about it. It was their second record, still with Peter Banks as guitarist in the band. For me, I really have a soft spot for it. It's probably their jazziest album. It's like a great soundtrack if you drive by night through a city. And Jon Anderson's voice is very coarse here. Came probably from smoking 30 cigarettes a day. But yeah, there's this sense of detachment and melancholy and sadness that is all over this record. It's a quite interesting vibe and mood, and quite unique. Particularly if you look at a track like Then, written by Jon Anderson, but also even a song like Sweet Dreams, which Anderson wrote with David Foster, his buddy from back in the day, from the band called Warriors. Even Sweet Dreams, while being sort of an uplifting 60s song, even there's this strange touch of melancholy in the music. It becomes more obvious in a track like The Prophet. Great song, very intricate, sort of psychedelic folk rock details in it. Even packaging a theme from Jupiter by Gustav Holst into the mix. So great record. Astral Traveler is certainly one of my highlights here. Yeah, and it closes up with the Time and the Word, very highly memorable song, and unsurprisingly a track they kept for a long time in their sort of live song list. So I think this is a very jazzy, moody album, but overall a very good record, and certainly something I enjoy listening to. Number 8, Key Studio. Now this obviously provokes two questions. First of all, what the hell is Key Studio? And secondly, why does it rank so high in my bloody list? Now this is about the years 1996 and 1997. A short period of time when John Brewer was the manager of Yes, who later became the producer of all these lengthy, slightly fluffy rock documentaries that I all kind of watch. And yeah, so in these 2 years, Yes put out these 2 albums which are called Keys to Ascension and Keys to Ascension Part 2. And this was a strange hybrid because like 60% of the material is at the beginning is live recordings of well-known tracks from the 70s mostly. This is suddenly out of nothing in the middle of the 90s. Suddenly, sort of the glorious lineup of Wakeman, Squire, Howe, Alan White, and Jon Anderson. And yeah, you have these live tracks. Basically the entire disc 1 and part of the disc 2, and crammed in the end there are some new studio recordings, very shyly put in there, but people reacted very well to the new material, and I totally understand why. So when they did Keys to Ascension 2, they did the same principle. First disc, live tracks of well-known records recorded live in San Luis Obispo. But here the entire second disc is just new studio material, and this was appreciated even more. It's quite unbelievable that this CD here came out only 2 weeks before Open Your Eyes came out. This must have been very confusing for Yes fans because you have like the best of the 90s and the worst of the 90s delivered within a month. It's quite difficult to understand think like that. So like 3 or 4 years later, they took the studio tracks from both CDs and merged them together to one studio album called Key Studio, and which I don't have because it would be completely redundant because I have the original 2 albums here. So that's kind of the story behind it. My only grievance with Key Studio is probably in the first 30 or 40 seconds of the CD, which are kind of corny because it starts with this track Footprints. And then suddenly, for half a minute, it feels very underwhelming, reminiscent of Talk. And then it gets better from minute to minute to minute to minute until it grows to a very, very good studio album. Very enjoyable. I mean, you have a track like Be the One, which is a very captivating, quite amazing song that came from this first Keys to Ascension record. You have Mind Drive, which is this cool giant track made of fragments from the Drama album. At least that's what I was told. And there's some really great parts here. Now, maybe my only problem with Mind Drive would be that not all parts are assembled in a way that sounds kind of motivated. It's just something they can do. They can take like 7 or 8 song themes and just screw them together to a 20-minute song that kind of feels very proggy because the melodies and the themes and the rhythms are constantly changing. But so it doesn't always feel that motivated here, like it makes sense to put it all together. But nevertheless, if you just listen to it, it's still a lot of kind of cool music going on here, and certainly less corny than many of the other kind of tracks they recorded during the same in the same decade. There are some outstanding keyboard solos here by Wakeman and Steve Howe. Particularly if you go like around 11 minutes of Mind Drive, there's just this amazing solo part between Wakeman and Steve Howe. Pretty cool. There's a track called Sign Language, which is with 3 minutes 30, the shortest track on this CD, and more like a little meditation by Rick Wakeman and Steve Howe, and it's rather sweet. Yeah, the longest track here is That Is, which is quite wonderful music, quite wonderful, with very dark lyrics, probably some of the darkest lyrics I've ever heard on a Yes recording. Yeah, and listen to the bass guitar in the last 5 to 6 minutes of that song. It's quite amazing. Yeah, and the album ends with Children of Light, and again, great song. How is that even possible? I mean, this record has really grown on me. This is really a good one. Key Studio, totally underrated, but maybe you are smart and give it a chance. So let's get to number 7, and this is 1977's Going for the One. This is the album that came after Relaya and after working with Patrick Moratz. And was it really a good idea to bring Rick Wakeman back? Well, that's a kind of a checkered answer for me, but I'll get to that. The album starts with the title track Going for the One, which is quite amazing. Excellent slide guitar playing by Steve Howe, very energetic, and this is a great opener. And it's this interesting mix of mystery and enigma, which has always been the best part of Yes albums. So also Wakeman plays some amazing stuff on this first track. Then you have Turn of the Century, which is really kind of this melodic, calm acoustic piece. Good contrast after this energetic opener. Parallels is a Chris Squire song. This is more of a controversial topic probably because as a track overall it's being criticized a lot, mostly because Rick Wakeman's contribution, who wanted to have a church organ going on here. And it's not the first time church organ has been used in this kind of rock or fusion or prog rock environment. I mean, Rick Wakeman has done it himself like 5 years prior to that when he was recording. Well, it was not 5 years, more like 3 years prior to that when he was recording Six Wives of Henry VIII. And actually in 1970, Keith Emerson did it on the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album, where it probably works best, mostly because it was isolated without the other instruments. And that's a bit of a problem because the way the timbre of a church organ is, it kind of kills the rest of the music on the track. I mean, it's like church organ all over the place. You really have to like church organs to like it on that song. But overall, I think Parallels is actually a pretty good song. So, for example, if you, let me find the album here. If you are listening to Yes shows, which was the second live album by Yes that came out in 1980. So here you can hear a live version of Parallels as an opener to the concert. And it's pretty great. I mean, the live version, I find it much better than the one here on the record. You have the B-side, which starts with Wondrous Stories, which is probably the best known song from the album and probably needed, so they got some sort of a commercial exposure as well. And then finally the epic track Awaken, which has really some great keyboard playing by Rick Wakeman, but mostly it's a song with some wonderful percussions by Alan White, drumming all over the place. So this is overall a good record. Gatefold sleeve, of course. And that's it. And let's go to my number 6. And my number 6 is... I'm just taking out the outer sleeves. Whoops. Stay here. The number 6 is the Yes album from 1971. By the way, I was exactly 31 days old when this album came out. So I always had this notion that my birth year, 1971, was quite a spectacular year in terms of amazing, sort of progressive and interesting records coming out. For many people, this is their favorite Yes album, or certainly in their top 3. But if this is your favorite Yes album of all times, I fully understand. I totally understand. Most certainly, it is a great choice to start to listen to Yes. If you haven't heard anything from that band, this record is pretty good entry point. It still breathes a little bit the atmosphere of the late 60s, but it's already a very exploratory album, pushing the envelope and featuring some really interesting stuff. Obviously, it's the last one with Tony Kaye for quite a while, so you still have the sort of the 60s organ sound here. But everything about this album is just big joy to listen to. The opening, Yours Is No Disgrace, has been many times the concert opener for the band when they played live. You have a wonderful 10 minutes long track like Starship Trooper, which another great example of wonderful bass playing by Chris Squire. And you hear Eddie Offord, the famous sound engineer. You really hear him starting to make his amazing skills obvious on this record. B-side starting with I've Seen All Good People. Again, a wonderful classic, showing the rather more accessible side of Yes. Then Adventure is slightly overlooked. I think this is the most overlooked track on this album. Very fascinating track with its own mood. It's probably the one song that still carries over a bit of the melancholy from Time and the Word. Yeah, and finally, Perpetual Change. Certainly another highlight on this record. Amazing energy, wonderful production, great, outstanding playing by Chris Squire. Gatefold sleeve. A little bit of a first edition flair here. So, this is the Yes album from 1971. Again, wonderful record. I have really nothing negative to say about this record at all. So, number 5. And finally, some controversy. Number 5, 90125. Yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into the mud. So some people probably do not like the idea that I have ranked this at number 5. And yeah, but I don't just think that this is a great album. I think this is a milestone and this is a masterpiece from beginning to the end. And this is a seminal album of its own era. And this was an album made for a great hi-fi system. And back in the 80s, when we've been listening to this, we were really astounded how well it sounded. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, people say, yeah, but isn't it when Yes sold out? But this was 1983. So when you switched on the radio in 1983, people were listening to Culture Club and Madonna and stuff like that. So this was the sound of 1983. And if you put on 90125 and listen to Changes or It Can Happen, nobody felt like, oh, I'm listening to sellout music, because this was completely intriguing and far too sophisticated, and the handwriting of this album was far too unique. So there's this chemical formula on this album that is just something else. And I mean, that I really liked the record back in the day, you can see by the fact that I even bought me a notation book with all the songs inside. And there's actually a lot of kind of complicated stuff going on here, and that's probably another aspect of this album where people just have a tendency to underrate it quite a lot. So yeah, I don't know where all this vitriol comes from. I mean, the mere idea that they would have put out in 1983, put out an album that sounds like Close to the Edge is just absurd, because this kind of music was just gone. It just didn't exist in the 80s. And I mean, even a band like King Crimson that never seemed to give a damn about the kind of the streams and flows of musical taste somewhere in the overground. Even a band like that sounded completely different in the 80s and kind of adapted to a certain pop aesthetic. And yes, this album has a very strong pop aesthetic. There's no doubt about that. That's something you have to accept, of course. But I like every song here. I would have a hard time to pick a favorite. Probably Changes, probably City of Love. I mean, even people that kind of like or respect the album, when they review it, they completely brush over the B-side, like, oh, no, not good, boring. Are you crazy? What are you talking about? The B-side is fantastic. Even a track like Our Song, that may be regarded as probably like one of the most poppiest moments of the whole record, even that track is kind of fascinating, because it's this strange mixture of quirkiness and gloriousness, and it works quite well. So I have nothing bad to say about this album. So yeah, when they say that 90125 is the album that divides the fans of Yes, you have a pretty good idea on which side of that divide I'm standing. And it makes it a little bit more understandable why Big Generator was such a huge disappointment. Because obviously there was this expectation that the next album will be on par with that, and it certainly was not. Let's keep going. Now number 4 is 1974's Relaya, the album recorded with Patrick Moraz. For many years this was my favorite Yes album. I was really fascinated by The Gates of Delirium, which is a very bold and very, very powerful composition and quite a feverish ride, I think. Now I've kind of a little bit re-evaluated this by making this ranking. Not because there's something about the album I would particularly dislike or something. By the way, it's still probably my favorite Roger Dean cover of all times. What a beauty. That's something you can really get lost in. Wonderful design. There's the inside of the gatefold. So I guess if the Gates of Delirium would be the measure, this might still be probably my favorite Yes album. But I guess if you take like the B-side, a song like I mean, Sound Chaser is quite amazing. It's obviously the most experimental and slightly insane track Yes ever did, but I think it's musically very coherent and very functioning. Now the last track is To Be Over, which is a bit of an Achilles heel of the album, I would say. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad song. It's a wonderful song. It's very sort of dreamy, and there's a sense of nostalgia almost, and maybe kind of a looking back at the 60s that at this point were just far gone. But I don't know if it had to be 9 minutes long. Nevertheless, this is just nitpicking, all right? It is nitpicking, but at this point, this late in the ranking game, everything is going to be nitpicking, because for 15 minutes now we are talking just about really wonderful albums overall. So maybe the order of the tracks should have been different, just starting with Sound Chaser and then To Be Over and then the B-side Gates of Delirium. I think people would have maybe perceived the album a little better. I don't know. But I don't know. This is still one of my favorite Yes albums, of course. And I think Patrick Moraz was a great keyboarder for Yes. And actually, I wish he would have done more with them. Certainly, I would like to have heard parallels on going for the one recorded with Patrick Moraz instead of Rick Wakeman. So let's get to number 3. And now we're deep in the stuff of legends. I'm talking about Fragile from 1971 also. Kind of November, I think, in the late 1971 this came out. And was the first album with Rick Wakeman, and obviously a huge game changer for the band, mostly because of Roundabout. And I think next to the Yes album, this is another great entry point for anybody who wants to study the music of Yes. It's a perfect gateway drug. And yeah, I mean, this is one zinger after the other. Obviously, you have a great songs here like South Side of the Sky, which is quite brilliant. Long Distance Runaround, Heart of the Sunrise. I mean, this is just filled with wonderful songs and wonderful music. And I really like the kind of the warmth of the music. It's very well produced, and there's a wonderful atmosphere to it, and it's it's a good album to kind of learn to listen to an album all the way through from beginning to an end, and not just picking songs. This is the right album to do that, I think. So I cannot say much about Fragile that has already not been said 1,000 times by other people, half of them on YouTube probably. So the end is near, and we are getting to the second place, and that would be the 1973's Tales from Topographic Oceans. Certainly an album that has the tendency to divide people, even those that are kind of favorable towards the album tend to think that it's a little too long and that it would have been a better album if it was trimmed down to one disc and not a double album. Yeah, that's probably all a little true. Let's check out the beautiful Roger Dean design. On the other hand, I've always perceived this album as a journey. I think of all the Yes albums, this is the one that mostly represents a journey. And this journey kind of takes 90 minutes, that's true. But it's also true that people usually prefer the A-side, the Revealing Science, and the D-side, Ritual. And the B-side and the C-side kind of gets overlooked. So you have like here the 4 tracks on a double album, so each record side is just one track. Yeah, but I love the B-side. I love the Remembering with this whole Relaya vocal part is quite wonderful. And the C-side is obviously the most challenging part of this whole journey, the Ancient. And so it's true that this album demands a little more patience and more attention than other albums, but I've always enjoyed it. It's quite adventurous, and it has a wonderful sound also, and a lot of interesting stuff to say about it. Actually, must have been quite an interesting challenge for Alan White, who was the new guy at this point. I always was a big fan of Tales from Topographic Oceans, and this might be an album that got bad critiques in the press over the decades, but I think it's far from being a failure financially or artistically. That's why this is my number 2. And the number 1 is not very surprising, so I will not make a big fuss about it. And those who are familiar with the Yes catalog kind of know which record I have not shown up until this time, and that's obviously 1972's Close to the Edge. I was thinking that let's see if my ranking can end up with Close to the Edge not being at number 1, because it's such an obvious choice. It's kind of like everybody else was doing it in their videos. But the thing is, while I was juggling around the top 5 choices, in the end you put on Close to the Edge on the turntable, you listen to it and you realize, damn, after 5 minutes you know, this is done. This is just far too good. Now, this is obviously not the right album to start to listen to Yes if you haven't heard this kind of music before. Obviously due to certain complexity and kind of difficulty to get through this first major, almost 20 minutes long track. It's a bit music for advanced classes, so to speak, and I know that it sounds pretentious and arrogant, but I don't even want to talk about it that much because everything has been said about this record. Certainly the recording method for this album was slightly insane. This was basically decisions made by committee, which happened through raising your voice and screaming at your fellow band member. But in the end, it turned out these groundbreaking results and became one of the greatest prog rock albums of all times. There's no doubt about that. This is a wonderful record, and A-side and B-side equally good. And it's obviously a kind of a pinnacle in the band's history. And it's also a great achievement for Eddie Offord, the sound engineer here, without whom probably this project would have collapsed on itself, I think. So it's not surprising that without any further mentioning, they put his photograph here on the back, just like a regular member of the band, which he was not. But without him, this record would probably be very difficult to achieve. So some more Roger Dean here, Close to the Edge. So that's it. As I promised, the beginning and the end of my ranking is not very surprising and a little predictable, but that's how it turned out. But I hope that at least somewhere in the middle there was some controversial or some surprising choices on my side, and that's kind of all for now. And I certainly hope when I start to edit this video that it's much shorter than the first version was. So have a nice day and see you next time. By the way, let's make a little playlist with a needle drop from each album. Just, from worst to best, just for fun. And I will put it at the end of this video. And if it gets blocked by the rights owners through YouTube, then I can still go inside the YouTube tools and just cut off this appendix. So the rest of the ranking video, or the first part, will come back again. But in case you are seeing this right now and hearing this right now, it means that it did not get blocked. So we'll see. Have fun.
in the empty corridors. There's no one sleeping, no one awake. I'd start an engine in the night, if only just to break the silence. That last intake of air that clouds in the night as we breathe. Too late for even the night planes to be. We can wait for dawn to carry on, then we can fly from with it runs the aching fear of hate. Could someone still remain who thinks he still could gain by escape?